One of the things I often heard in my outreach to the outside world is, I didn't know McDonald's did this stuff. Like you work on corporate social responsibility at McDonald's, so I wanted to, I was very motivated to kind of reveal the story. I also thought probably the sweet spot for my audience is the business community and the NGO community, because companies today are wrestling with this idea of how to serve society and make a profit at the same time, and it's not easy. The battle to do good, it's a battle. Everything in business is a battle, but certainly doing good takes a lot of effort. I thought by writing the book and sharing the stories of all these things that went over the last 30 years, I mean, let's face it, McDonald's was the hot rod issue for so many things. You know, how we reacted, who we worked with, how we solved problems, how we did not succeed. I thought all these things would be worthwhile for the business leaders today and the NGO leaders today that are trying to make a difference.
So early on in the book, in the introduction, you talk about how the prevailing wisdom among businesses was the only responsibility a company had was to be profitable. But you challenge this notion early and often throughout the book. So why is corporate social responsibility and sustainability important for business like McDonald's and Google as well?
I think that's what's really interesting about the journey of all the companies over the last 3 decades, really, is that you can't just make money anymore. You know, before 10, 20, 30 years ago, companies were more punished for not doing good. I mean, think of Nike and sweatshops, or Shell with some of the instances that they had. But really, companies today are seeing that by responding to societal issues, they're bringing value to their business. You know, for McDonald's, the day that we created our own framework for the future, which was 2014, the headline was, we're going to grow our business by making a positive difference in the world. And I think that's the evolution that we've seen, is that societal issues don't have to be a drag on the business. They don't have to be a risk. They don't have to be something to be afraid of. It's actually what people want. And consumers want to engage with companies that care. And it's the companies that can figure out the right formula of doing what's good for society, what's good for the company, that are going to be the leaders of tomorrow's world. And again, it took us a while to figure that out at McDonald's. Most of our work at McDonald's, admittedly, was probably very reactive at the beginning. When we were attacked on waste or animal welfare, we were like at McDonald's, hey, we're good people, we're a good company, why are you picking on us? And we still did something about it, but it came from more of a defensive posture. So what's really changed, and I think the opportunity today, is that companies should not be afraid of this. They should look at this as like, climb the hill. The more responsible we are in a smart way, taking smart risks, we can gain more customers, more sales, we can save money, better for our brand, our people want to work for a company that cares. I mean, the business case for this is absolutely solid.
You referenced some of the battles and some of the attacks that came on came on McDonald's, and you had to deal with a number of critics, PETA, Greenpeace, the movie Super Size Me, the book Fast Food Nation. So what do you learn about dealing with this wide range of critics and activists?
Sometimes I think the subtitle of my job was how to deal with the critics and how to deal with the people that maybe didn't like us. The best thing I learned is that really they're not the enemy. You know, almost all these groups that have an interest in companies, and they might come at you from a negative viewpoint, they might start a campaign, but the reality is they're as passionate about what they're trying to solve in the world as we are in the company trying to do what we're doing in the company. So if you start with this idea that these outside groups, I always had the idea that I'm going to assume innocence, that the people coming have the innocence of saying, hey, we want you to change. They might come at us in a way that we don't like, but that maybe we should listen and learn. You know, to me, the best example is something, I mean, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, as you know.
Of course.
And for me to have an impact on the Amazon rainforest in Brazil in my life, I was like, how did this ever happen? But real short story. Greenpeace attacked us, I think it was 2005. And it was for too much soya farming in Brazil, causing deforestation in the Amazon. Soya is exported to Europe. So a bunch of Greenpeace people showed up in our restaurants, dressed up as chickens, and campaigning against us. And so when I just love that picture there. Can you imagine having breakfast at McDonald's like that? And I was very proud of our company and happy that I was part of the team that said to Greenpeace, after we looked at the issue, we shocked the living daylights out of Greenpeace by calling them and said, hey, Greenpeace, we actually agree with you. We don't agree with your demands. We're not going to change soya farming overnight, McDonald's. We're not into farming. But if we work together, we can get other retailers asking for the same thing. Cargill is one of our biggest suppliers. They're deep into Brazil, one of the biggest soya traders in the world. If we work together, Greenpeace, how about it? And to Greenpeace's credit, instead of campaigning, we shook hands, we met in rooms for a couple weeks, we gathered 15 other retailers, Cargill agreed to help us. In 3 months' time, from the time the campaign started, this moratorium was put in place to save the Amazon.
Wow.
So, I think most people look at, oh, Greenpeace, they're bad, they're the enemy. No. As a matter of fact, we took a trip for 9 days through the Amazon, and I don't think you could tell the difference between the McDonald's people on the trip and the Greenpeace trip. So it's amazing how much we have in common with people that come to us versus what we have that's maybe not in common.
The organizations weren't the only folks that helped you on this journey. One character that really jumped out in the book is Temple Grandin.
Did you like her?
I loved it. I mean, do you mind elaborating on her and why she was so important when you were working with animals?
Well, if you had asked me the most fascinating person I ever worked with, it would be Dr. Temple Grandin. She's, first of all, she's a renowned animal scientist. She's probably the most renowned and respected animal scientist in the world, but she's also autistic, and it makes her a very special personality. So my boss gave me the job in, I think it was like 1998. He goes, Bob, you got to create an animal welfare program for our suppliers. I didn't know anything about animals. And so I needed to find somebody that knew about animals, and Dr. Temple Grandin, I heard, was the best that there is. So met her, she had this idea of creating an audit system with our meat suppliers. And I always remember the first day we went into the first meat supplier. It's called Lopez Foods. It's in Oklahoma City. And we go in there. I thought I was going in with Cher or somebody like that because Dr. Temple Grandin was a rock star. And there was people coming out of the woodwork. They wanted to meet her because she's so highly respected by everybody. She's respected by the animal activists. She's respected by industry. So all I did was channel her ideas. I matched her up with our suppliers. And lo and behold, it wasn't all that easy. But over the course of 3 to 5 years, we implemented leading-edge animal welfare guidelines and audit procedures for all the suppliers for McDonald's. But best yet, the magic of working for McDonald's and what gave me a lot of satisfaction is when we did things for McDonald's, they ended up being adopted by everybody in the industry throughout the world. So now animal welfare is almost standard operating procedure based on working with Dr. Temple Grandin. So everybody should watch the movie Temple Grandin. It's an HBO movie, Claire Danes. You'll love her yourself if you don't know her by now.
McDonald's did a lot of these great initiatives, but it seems throughout the book they had struggled to communicate these efforts that they're doing. And it seems to be a common issue with other companies, and I can even say Google sometimes has issues communicating our efforts as well. So how does a company communicate their efforts in a way that actually works?
One of the main complaints I got from all the people that worked for McDonald's, because the McDonald's people would know what we're doing. We always thought we were much better at being a responsible company than how we were portrayed in the outside world. So everybody would come to me and say, well, why don't we share more with what we're doing? I don't know. I think there's 2 reasons for why there's a lack of good communication going on. One is, it is very hard to talk about the good things you're doing. Whenever you open yourself up to touting something you're doing, there's always something about your company or organization that they can kind of pick on. So I had a boss for several years that said, hey, the strategy was to get caught doing good, so not being proactive. I think the other thing is, companies get under attack, and like I said before, a lot of companies, the natural reaction is to say the critics are wrong. Mm-hmm. The media, why are you asking me that question? You just kind of get defensive. I think the solution on it is, one, I just think the more that I see even today, CEOs talking to the public, it's like corporate speak. It's not something a human being would actually say. So I think, one, really work hard at honest human communication, as if I'm talking to my nephew, versus trying to talk to the world. And then I would say being open and honest. And a lot of companies they're afraid to do that because when you do that, you have to say, here's what we do well, and you also have to say, well, here's where we are not doing well. And I think companies need to get over that. Because consumers just want to see companies trying. They want to see a commitment. They don't mind a lack of progress as long as you're trying hard and being open about it and making steps along the way.
And this all kind of leads into the values that a company has. And there's a chapter in your book where you discuss the challenges that McDonald's had rolling out their company values, given the complexities with the different organizations within the company and having global values when different regions behave differently. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
One of my favorite things that I ended up getting involved with, our CEO at the time, this is around 2007, Jim Skinner, one of our great CEOs, he really thought as a legacy for the company, he could actually more formalize the values of the company. So he created these 7 values that you see here right now. And we ended up being a team that's tried to integrate it into the business globally. And we worked on this for about 5 years. To be honest with you, it didn't go as far as I wanted it to go. For instance, if you take a look at the values, I always thought they had a little bit too much formal corporate speak. First one says we give back to our community. So that's what we developed at the corporate level. I really liked what Australia did. We were trying to make it relevant in the different markets. And so Australia said,
translation, we look after the locals. We grow our business profitably. And translation is, sure, we're here to make dollars, but that's what keeps 85,000 of us in a job.
I think, again, the values, when Jim Skinner retired and a new CEO came in, our values that were being worked on, it sort of fizzled away. So in some sense, they didn't last. Although I'm sure if we talk to the people at McDonald's today, there's values, and I see it on their website, but they're not the same values. So you kind of wonder sometimes how they shift. So my advice is, I think values are important. I think there should just be 3 or 4 of them. I think top management should always be referencing the values of the company anytime they can. I think the people that work for the company should be measured in some degree by how they live those values. And that would be, to me, the ideal world. And there's no better way to be a sustainable company than having people that live the values that are envisioned. And I'm not quite sure what the Google values are, but and how your journey is going. But that'd be my advice for you as you go on your journey.
Our values are on the 3 respects. So let's talk a bit about the internal battles you faced, because it wasn't always external where you ran into issues. Specifically, you were given an assignment to create a bold plan for sustainability in 2020. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, our number 2 guy ended up being our CEO, Don Thompson. He gave me this assignment in about 2010 to work on a team to develop a really bold framework for what we stand for. So finally, I started working on all these efforts back in 1988. So it took how many years? 22 years to finally get to a point where the company's saying this needs to be strategic. And he asked me to come up with a way to have bold goals for the future. So our team worked on it for quite a long time. And I came into the senior management team, the top 20 people in the company, and they were not saying a whole lot of good about the framework as I was describing it to them. And they kind of got uncomfortable. Again, this is around the beginning of the 2010, 2011. They go, can we really have 100% of all of our food and packaging be certifiably sustainable by 2020? We had a goal for 100% sustainable fish and coffee and palm oil, things like that. And we had just opened up Vietnam, for example. We're like, are we going to be able to do this in Vietnam? And anyway, there's a whole lot of risk averseness in the room. And I was asked to go back to the team and make it less bold. And so I was very downtrodden leaving the room. But I talked to my team, and the team told me, go back in and go at it again. We didn't want to change a thing. And so I went back in. I used this chart here. And I thought I got to approach this differently, because how could a company be asking our team to be doing, they wanted us to be a leader on sustainability. But then they told me in that meeting they wanted no risk. So I went back and said, hey, where do you want us to be? And it just really opened up the conversation to a point where they approved the goals. So it worked. And I'm very happy. But since then, since I retired, it's amazing what McDonald's is doing. They've already developed even bigger and better goals. So I'm very proud of that.
And I think that leads into one thing that became clear is with the size and scale that McDonald's has, through these efforts, you can really drive transformative change. And you referenced a little bit earlier the Amazon efforts. I mean, not only changing the organization at McDonald's, but the industry and the world at large. Can you share a couple other examples?
Being a leader of sustainability in a company, it sounds really fascinating and interesting, which it is, and you get a lot of responsibility. But the bottom line is, I'm not really responsible for anything either, because I'm not a head of supply chain, I'm not a head of operations, I'm not the head of marketing. So a lot of my role is to work with partners and leaders to identify what's good for the company that they will want to promote. Probably the thing that I'm really most proud of is our company, this framework that we developed. One of our specific goals was to start buying sustainable beef. Mm-hmm. And you talk about where the sweet spot is for McDonald's and how it could be good for the business and good for society. We call that shared value, bringing both values at once. And we had a team of people come in, NGOs from the outside world and chief sustainability officers from like Coca-Cola, Unilever. They came into our top management meeting. I was given a half day to convince our team that this is what we should do. So I thought the best way to do it is bring these outsiders in. We asked these 8 leaders from the outside world, what should McDonald's do? If you were CEO for one day and had to make one decision, what would you do? They all said, you should work on beef, make beef more sustainable. Your brand is beef. Beef has environmental health impacts. It's, for McDonald's global footprint, the carbon footprint for McDonald's, it's 75% in supply chain. Wow. And it's mostly coming from livestock. So I was amazed that our company agreed to set a goal for starting to buy it when we didn't even know what the definition of it was. And you said we have a lot of influence and power. We do and we don't. Mm-hmm. I often ask, how much beef do we buy? And I'll ask different audiences, and a lot of audiences will say, hey, you must buy 10, 20, 50% of the beef in the world. Well, we buy 2% of the beef, which, by the way, is still big.
Yep.
But we cannot snap our fingers and change the way beef ranchers produce, cows and how they process them. So what we've learned over the years is that rather than kind of mandate all this stuff, we collaborate. And with beef, we used our convening power to create a global roundtable for sustainable beef. And so what we did, we brought in the World Wildlife Fund, an NGO, we brought in Walmart, we brought in the biggest beef company in the world called JBS, and dozens of other stakeholders to define sustainable beef. And it's proceeding at a really good clip. McDonald's Canada, as we speak, is selling sustainable certified beef. Wow. So glad to see that happening, and it is transformative when you realize that you can actually work on things that change things beyond McDonald's. Yeah.
You also mentioned the trip to the Amazon. This is you there.
If I had to say what my favorite adventure was, that was definitely going through the Amazon. And I really, to see up close how people live in the Amazon. I think too many people in companies, they don't go out and see what really is happening. So I think it's really, really important to go out and see what's happening with the forest in the Amazon. Go see how tomatoes are picked in southern Florida. Go see how animals are treated in facilities. So that was really a big part of what I felt very strongly about.
At the end of each chapter, you have these hard knock nuggets, these learnings, teachings that you end with. You mentioned earlier that you had no real authority in your role, so you were really relying on your ability to influence others. Can you share some of your tips on how you were able to accomplish that?
Yeah, I think people that work on corporate social responsibility and sustainability, sometimes I think we should be having a title, maybe influencing manager, influencing director, officer of influence, because I think that's a chief skill that you have to have. And maybe it's my next book, but in terms of how you do, there's books written about how you influence others. All I could tell you that what I think worked for me is it starts with developing really good relationships. You need to develop trust. So people need to trust you. They need to trust you as a human being, and also trust that whatever you're saying and doing is the truth. You're going to deliver. So it starts with trust. I think it also starts influencing, and I'm not sure they teach this a whole lot. Basically, you got to be a great communicator. And I remember Jim Cantalupo. He was one of our great CEOs of McDonald's. He turned around the business in 2001. I asked him after 2 years of turning it around, I said, Jim, what did you learn that surprised you? He goes, I can't believe that 99% of the job is communicating. And so it always stuck with me. Wow. But I think being persuasive, and I remember reading this book, and I'd recommend it to your watchers here. It's called Made to Stick by Chip Heath. I just read that book, and I go, so many people in sustainability that are pushing things, they put forth facts and figures, and they kind of think how they think, and they're pushing something to somebody else. I always thought the best way is to think how you think, and to put things into a way that I can convince you. You need the facts and figures, but it's more the story and more maybe the emotional side that you also need to communicate.
Definitely. So at this point, we can open it up to audience questions if anyone has some.
So before coming to McDonald's, what did you do? What was your background between the South Side and McDonald's?
I grew up in the South Side of Chicago first, and I think I'm so lucky to do the work I ended up doing, because I always say I'm a product of the 1960s, and I have an older brother, 4 years older. You know him well. He's your father. And he actually led the way. We used to tape record. I mean, this is back in 1964, 1966, 1968. We used to record all the songs and play tapes, make a top 10 list. But I just remember I loved the music of the 60s, that revolutionary tape, the Bob Dylan, the Neil Young, the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Jimi Hendrix, and this whole explosion of peace and justice, anti-Vietnam. To be honest with you, I feel like that's who I was. I was an activist at heart. But hey, I went to college, I got married, I had kids. There weren't jobs like this when I came out of school in 1978 to try to do good in society in the company. So, okay, that was kind of all I hid inside of me. And until, to answer your question more specifically, believe it or not, I was in charge of truck drivers and getting food and packaging delivered to the McDonald's restaurants. And so back in 1988, 89, McDonald's was under attack. Oh, we're a symbol of a disposable society. There's too much waste being produced by all of our packaging. Remember this well, you're too young. For the older people, you remember the polystyrene foam clamshell that people hated. So for the first time ever, McDonald's was a despised, evil company. And there was nobody working on the environment. And for some reason, they plucked me out and said, hey, Bob, you're in charge of saving the polystyrene clamshell. We tried to recycle it. I got rid of CFCs and packaging. And that was my beginning. And that's when I realized how lucky I was to get something that maybe was inside me waiting to come out. And I got to do it through business.
It's somewhat ironic because your goal was to save the clamshell, and
I didn't succeed.
But it opened your eyes to other ways to keep.
We couldn't save that because people couldn't see the value in that polystyrene clamshell. We spent millions of dollars trying to save it. I'm glad we didn't. It was such an obstacle in the way of our image. Yep. And really, we ended up working on this project with the Environmental Defense Fund. And just to tell that story real shortly, we were the first company to work with a famous environmental group, the Environmental Defense Fund, back in 1990. Today, corporations and NGOs work together, but that was like the first big one that happened. And we worked for 6 months, and we reduced about 42 things to reduce, reuse, recycle within McDonald's. And we measured during the decade of the 90s, we reduced 300 million pounds of waste. Wow. And we got a White House award. I was actually in the Rose Garden, wow, getting an award, whereas 2 years earlier, we were in the doghouse. So we came a long way.
That's awesome.
So I cut my teeth that way. It's really good to cut your teeth early on with such a win-win-win thing. And that's how I see it should be for companies today. This battle to do good it should be less a battle and more of an opportunity for businesses.
I think one thing that became clear as you're working with these critics is, I think it was easy for you to work on environmental issues because it was a passion point of yours. But there were times when, specifically on the animal side, you admittedly didn't know much about animal treatment. And you even disagreed with the viewpoints, like you're not a vegan, you eat meat. And so it was, how are you able to bridge that gap when you're coming from a different viewpoint of someone you're working with that's really challenging you to be better?
Well, I always try to find common ground, so I can find common ground with those people that are involved with the environment and protecting the planet. I can find people that are for social justice and better conditions for people working. And I'm all for good animal treatment, but the issue here was animal rights versus animal welfare. And there's a real big difference there. So yeah, I had a hard time wrapping my head around the animal rights people that wanted animals to be at a similar level as human beings. But I didn't have to wrestle too hard because the bottom line is animal welfare, a little bit different. I spoke about Dr. Temple Grandin.
Yep.
We would do all of our work to protect animals. There's nobody more passionate about making sure they didn't suffer pain and suffering and abuse. But at the end of the day, we'd have dinner at a steakhouse that night, versus looking at the animals like they don't belong in the system at all. I respect people that are vegetarians, but that's not what the McDonald's is about.
Right.
And so I think there's common ground to be found, even in these thorny issues that you referred to.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm just curious to hear if it's challenging with so many franchisees around the world, how you keep your corporate social responsibility goals the same at a corporate level and then also at the franchise level, if that's been challenging or something you guys have had to focus on.
Yeah, McDonald's is owned by 5,000 independent owner-operators, and I think today it's getting closer to 95% of the whole system is run by independent business people. So by definition, you can't force anything down their throats. And even the great owner-operators of McDonald's, the reason they're so good is they're entrepreneurial. They don't necessarily like to be told what to do. So, and that's part of our success. So it is a challenge. So how do you work with that? The way I worked with it is, number one, you got to get something going that people get behind. And what I'm really happy, even since I left, McDonald's has made sustainability almost part of their brand. They've called it now Scale for Good. Our owner-operators are in the front lines. They hear all these complaints, and people want us to be a better company, and we think we're good already. So, in general, the programs that I was working on, and they're working on today, I think they welcome that. The owner-operators want the pressure relief of not being perceived as a bad guy. And plus, you got to set up goals that are actually doable and they can relate to. So McDonald's is setting goals back then and even today to reduce waste, to recycle more, to have recyclable packaging and supply chain. So many of these things, they're not about half the things you can do in a restaurant, you do in a restaurant in terms of how you train your people, but so much is done in supply chain, for example. I mean, the biggest impact for McDonald's is in supply chain. And the owner-operators, kind of trust McDonald's to do the right things there, and I spoke about a lot of the examples. So I think the franchise system is a strength, but it does make it a little bit more difficult.
First, a comment and a question. Bob, thanks for coming. I wanted to compliment you on your choice of cover art for the book. I think you really nailed it. I know you were considering a number of options. Great job. As far as the question, clearly your influence has impacted McDonald's in a massively positive way over the years. I was just curious, not everything in corporations is roses, so biggest challenge or biggest regret or biggest thing you worked on that you were hoping to get done that just didn't take flight?
My list is long. I don't know. I think at a macro level, what probably disappointed, like if I was frustrated about my work at McDonald's, it would be probably the decision-making process. It just got worse and worse as we got bigger. Sometimes I felt I had to go to 30, 40 people to say yes to something. I had to go to another 20 or 30 that one no kind of knocks it out of the box. So I think we became too bureaucratic. When I retired, the new CEO, Steve Easterbrook, was going to shake that all up and get decision-making more streamlined. I haven't lived the last 4 years to know what that's like, but from what I read, I think they're doing a much better job of that. I think another thing that frustrates me, if I had to relive the McDonald's history, like I thought about this when I was reading the book, we didn't come up with our strategic framework that I spoke about until 2014. These issues started to percolate in 1988, 1990. So you could say that we were awfully late to join the bandwagon. I wish we would have developed our framework 10, 15 years earlier. But it's never too late.
Yep.
And that's my message to a broader audience today in all companies. Just don't be sitting back afraid of this. Get going on it now and develop your strategy. Companies should develop what they stand for. They shouldn't be sitting back waiting for criticism to come in. Develop your own goals, what you want to stand for, do it, communicate, and keep that process going.
What is your experience with people who view sustainability altruistically versus necessary for PR?
Well, I think if I understand your question, it's looking at sustainability through an altruistic lens versus
people who maybe view it as something that is in their hearts the right thing to do versus, yeah, we have to do it because it looks poorly if we don't.
Well, that's an interesting question because that's part of the journey that we were on. I work for a company that the reason that we did a lot of the stuff before all in history is that our company really wanted to do the right thing. I would go into meetings at McDonald's. This is in the 90s and 2000s, tough issues. All the questions I was being asked were, what's the right thing to do? And, what the cost of it would be talked a little bit later. But feeling good about it isn't good enough in a company. And, back in the old days, it used to be just philanthropy. So I really think at a higher level than feeling good about it is that companies should be looking at it as actually good for their business. It should be like more mercenary. I mean, David, you talked about, it used to be that the only goal of business was to make a profit, but I think profit and purpose go together, and the better companies are going to see that sooner versus later, and you should do it for both reasons. You should do it because it's in your heart. I think most people that work for companies want to do good, and you should unleash that in your organization. But the best way to unleash it is it comes from the C-suite, you have people working for it. I'll give you an example of how integrated this is into McDonald's today. During most of my time at McDonald's, 30 years or so working on it, I was a staff of one many years. Sometimes I had one or two people working for me along the way. It got to be a little bit more and more. But since we established a framework, they've got over 40 people with sustainability kind of in their job description around the world, which really tells you that it's integrated, not as a nice thing to do, but more as a way to grow the business.
What's the single thing we can encourage consumers to do within this category to make a difference on sustainability? We
never solved the riddle, in my time there in terms of getting the consumer directly involved. But I think that's changing because what's changing is the brand, the power of the brand. One of the things that we were trying to solve at McDonald's is McDonald's brand health. Back when Jim Skinner was CEO, back in about 2008, 2009, we had a very discouraging trend at McDonald's. Our business was growing like this. These are the charts that we've thrown up on the walls. And our brand health was going like this. So we learned through studying brand health. For instance, we had 42 indicators for brand health. About 21 of them were long-term, and almost every one of those 21 were related to some aspect of sustainability, how you treat your people, how you treat the environment, your supply chain, are you ethical, questions like that. And so what we learned is that consumers around the world really cared about these issues. Now, do they want to pay more? Probably not. But in terms of the brand reputation, they want a company to do that. And we also learned, part of the reason that we got a strategy going to McDonald's is that our researchers said that for every 1% increase in brand health, we would get 2% increase in sales. But it takes 3 to 5 years to achieve that. So it takes kind of a long-term effort. So I think you're seeing more of that now through companies like McDonald's. I've noticed more visibility of this, because I think companies like McDonald's are seeing that it does impact their brand. They got to put money behind it so that consumers can see it.
In the book, you talk about in even here today, you talked about the aversion to risk, and some of that stems from a missed target. So what advice would you give if you fall short of the goals that you set for yourself, and how would you handle that situation?
I think that's one of the things that stops companies from doing a bold goal. Like, what if we don't get there? Are we going to end up in jail? We had people at McDonald's that thought, oh, if we don't achieve this goal, I'm really going to get in trouble. And there is a certain element to that, believe me. I mean, when you put a goal out there, you got to give it a sincere effort to get there. One of the things that hurt my efforts at McDonald's was early on, this is about 2000, we made this announcement to get out of trans fatty acids in our cooking oil. And we said we'd do it in about 3 years' time. And we failed to meet that deadline. And we ended up getting a lawsuit of some sort and settling for $10 million or so. We ended up getting rid of the TFAs in our cooking oil, but it took a couple years later. And it always left a stain on the companies. Like, we were like, well, why set a goal when somebody could come around and kind of go after us? But I think to answer your question more directly, what you need to do is be very open and honest. And what we've learned, and other companies have learned, if you set a recycling goal and it's 50% and all you do is achieve 40%, keep ongoing communication. Here's what we're doing, and here's where we're failing. Here's where we need some more help. Just being more open and honest about it is a way to share the experience with consumers. And I think the critics and the NGOs, they encourage companies, they'd rather see you try and maybe fail a little bit along the way versus not even try at all.
Last question I'll ask is, what excites you about corporate social responsibility and sustainability today?
Well, what really excites me is how I see the younger people getting involved. I mean, I'm just so impressed with, for instance, I'm impressed with the team at McDonald's, the people that are there. There's a few more of them, as I mentioned before, but they're, at the age that I was at, they're smarter than I am. They're go-getters. They know how to work with people. And I speak a lot at different colleges and universities. I mean, there's so many people now that when they go through MBA schools, they want to make a difference in the organizations that they join. And now they have an outlet for that. And so seeing, I would say the CEOs of my generation, in terms of how they really looked at sustainability, I would say in general, I give them a flunking grade.
Wow.
I mean, more of them looked at it as a problem versus an opportunity. Whereas I see the younger executives coming up today, I have a lot of hope that, who's leading the charge in the court? So take carbon footprint and climate change, and we hear a lot about that, but who's leading the charge? It's not government, but you got companies every day making commitments, McDonald's included. And I think that's where leadership's going to come, and it's going to come stronger with the next generation of leaders.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us, Bob, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.